The morning sun was just beginning to stream through the windows of ABC's New York studio when the production team for The View gathered for their daily meeting. The head producer, Nancy Williams, couldn't hide her excitement as she addressed the room. "I still can't believe we pulled this off," she said, tapping her clipboard against her palm. "Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro on the same show. This is going to be huge for our ratings." The room buzzed with energy. Getting one of these Hollywood giants would have been a coup. Having both on the same episode was unprecedented. The two actors rarely appeared together publicly despite their decades in the film industry. Both were promoting new films, Eastwood directing a historical drama and De Niro starring in a gritty crime thriller. But everyone knew the real draw was seeing these two legends share the same stage. "How did we manage to book them both?" asked Tom, one of the younger production assistants who had only been with the show for 6 months. Nancy smiled. "A lot of phone calls, a lot of favors, and honestly, a bit of luck. Their publicity tours happened to overlap. But don't get too excited yet. We still have to get through today without any issues." Her caution wasn't unfounded. Both actors were known for being particular about their appearances. Eastwood, now in his 90s but still sharp as a tack, was famously economical with his words off-screen as well as on. De Niro had a reputation for being intensely private and sometimes prickly with interviewers who asked the wrong questions. "Has anyone heard if there's any bad blood between them?" asked Lisa, who handled guest relations. Nancy shrugged. "Nothing specific, but they've never worked together. Different styles, different crowds. Just make sure their green rooms are well stocked and separate." Across town, Clint Eastwood was already awake and had been for hours. Early rising was a habit he'd maintained throughout his life, from his days as a young actor to his current status as one of Hollywood's most respected directors. He sat at the desk in his hotel room, reviewing notes for the interview while sipping black coffee. His phone rang. It was his longtime assistant, Bill. "The car will be ready in 30 minutes, Bill said. "Also, I just got word that De Niro arrived at his hotel last night." Eastwood nodded, though no one could see him. "All right," he said simply. "You two haven't crossed paths in a while," Bill ventured. There was a pause. "Not since that awards dinner in 2015, Eastwood replied. "Should be fine," but his tone suggested otherwise. The awards dinner had been a Film Foundation gala where Eastwood and De Niro had exchanged words over a political disagreement. Nothing that made the papers, but enough that industry insiders knew there was tension between the two. Meanwhile, in another upscale hotel just blocks away, Robert De Niro was going through his own morning routine. Unlike Eastwood's minimalist preparation, De Niro was surrounded by people, his publicist, his personal assistant, and a stylist who was suggesting different ties. "The blue one," De Niro said decisively, cutting short the discussion. "And remind me again who else is on this show." His publicist, Jennifer, checked her tablet. "Just Eastwood. They've dedicated the full hour to both of you." De Niro raised an eyebrow. "Eastwood? Nobody mentioned that." Jennifer looked up, sensing the shift in mood. "Is that going to be a problem?" De Niro shook his head, but his expression had hardened slightly. "No, no problem." He turned to look out the window at the New York skyline. The last time he'd been in the same room as Eastwood, words had been exchanged that couldn't be taken back. De Niro was passionate about his political beliefs, and Eastwood was equally steadfast in his opposing views. In an industry that largely leaned one way politically, their occasional public disagreements had become something of a symbol of the nation's own divided landscape. "Just keep the conversation to the films," De Niro told Jennifer. "That's all I'm there to talk about." By mid-morning, the studio was a hive of activity. The View's hosts were in makeup, reviewing their question cards and discussing how to handle the two heavyweight guests. "I'm going to ask Eastwood about his directing process," said one host. "He's always so interesting when he talks about working with actors. And I want to ask De Niro about how the industry has changed," said another. "He's seen it all." "Just remember," the show's director cautioned during their pre-show huddle, "these are two strong personalities with different viewpoints. Keep things light and focused on their work." At exactly 9:15 a.m., 15 minutes ahead of his scheduled arrival time, Clint Eastwood's black SUV pulled up to the studio's back entrance. True to his reputation for punctuality, the legendary actor and director stepped out, nodded to the waiting staff, and followed his handler inside with long, purposeful strides. Despite his age, Eastwood moved with the ease of someone decades younger, dressed in a simple but elegant dark suit that hung perfectly on his tall, lean frame. "Good morning," he said to the group of staff who had gathered to greet him, his voice carrying that familiar, gravelly quality that had become his trademark. "Where am I headed?" The green room prepared for Eastwood was comfortable but not lavish, exactly as requested. He settled in, declined offers of coffee or water, and sat quietly reviewing some notes while occasionally glancing at his watch. 30 minutes later, with considerably more fanfare, Robert De Niro arrived. Where Eastwood had come with just 2 people, De Niro was accompanied by an entourage of 5, his publicist, personal assistant, stylist, security guard, and a consultant, who specialized in prepping celebrities for television appearances. Mr. De Niro would prefer still water, not sparkling, his assistant informed the show's hospitality coordinator. "And the lighting in the green room. Can we adjust that? It's a bit harsh." De Niro himself was cordial but reserved, shaking hands with the key staff members and asking a few questions about the show's format. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive at the same time. The production assistant assigned to De Niro's green room was sweating slightly as she tried to address all the requests coming her way. In her 2 years at The View, she'd never seen such a particular guest, or one with so many people managing his experience. Down the hall, the first hint of trouble came when a makeup artist mentioned to Eastwood that De Niro had arrived. "Is he in his green room?" Eastwood asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, sir, just down the hall." Eastwood nodded. For a moment it seemed he might say something else, but he simply returned to his notes. The show's producer, Nancy, had been moving between departments, making sure everything was running smoothly. She paused outside De Niro's green room, hearing what sounded like a tense conversation inside. Knocking lightly, she entered to find De Niro on the phone, speaking in low but clearly irritated tones. "I don't care what they said. I'm not here to debate politics with him," De Niro was saying. He looked up, saw Nancy, and quickly ended his call. "Everything okay?" he asked her, as if she hadn't just walked in on something concerning. "All good," Nancy said brightly, professionalism kicking in. "We're about 20 minutes from going live. The hosts are excited to have you both on." De Niro smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Looking forward to it." As Nancy left the room, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. There had been rumors of tension between the 2 actors, but both their teams had assured her there would be no issues. Now she wasn't so sure. With 10 minutes to showtime, the backstage area was controlled chaos. Makeup artists made final touches, sound technicians checked microphones, and the hosts gathered for a last-minute huddle. And then, in a moment that seemed almost engineered by fate, Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro came face to face in the hallway leading to the stage. The staff who witnessed it would later describe the moment as electric. The 2 men, both icons in their field, stood just feet apart. Eastwood, tall and imposing even in his 90s. De Niro, shorter but radiating intensity. "Robert," Eastwood said with a small nod. "Clint," De Niro replied, his expression unreadable. For 3 long seconds they simply looked at each other. Then, with the barest minimum of social courtesy, they continued on their separate ways to the stage. A production assistant leaned over to whisper to Nancy, "Did you feel that? The temperature in the room just dropped about 10 degrees. Nancy nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. What had seemed like a brilliant booking coup now felt potentially disastrous. But it was too late to change anything. The show's famous welcome music had begun to play, the audience was applauding, and The View's most anticipated episode in years was about to begin. No one, not even Nancy with all her years of television experience, could have predicted exactly how it would end. The bright studio lights seemed to intensify as the show's theme music faded. The audience's applause thundered through the studio, a wave of excitement that washed over everyone present. The 5 hosts of The View settled into their seats, their smiles wide and practiced, though keen observers might have noticed a touch of nervousness in their eyes. "Welcome back to The View," said Joanne, the senior host who had been with the show for over a decade. Her voice carried the perfect blend of warmth and authority. "Today we have an absolutely incredible show for you. 2 of the greatest legends in film history are here with us." The audience's applause grew even louder. "Please welcome Academy Award winners Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro." The camera panned to the entrance where both men emerged, walking out together yet somehow apart. Eastwood moved with that distinctive, purposeful stride that had made him an icon in westerns decades ago. Just behind him, De Niro walked with his own characteristic intensity, his eyes scanning the studio as if taking mental notes. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Some were literally jumping with excitement, phones raised to capture this rare moment. Eastwood reached the seating area first, raising a hand in acknowledgement of the crowd's reception. His smile was restrained but genuine. De Niro followed, offering a slight wave and the hint of a smile. The contrast in their body language was striking. Eastwood all straight lines and measured movements. De Niro more compact energy held in check. After handshakes with each host, the 2 actors took their seats on opposite ends of the curved table. The physical distance between them seemed intentional. "Wow," said Penny, the youngest host, genuinely starstruck despite years in the business. "I can't believe we have both of you here. This might be the biggest moment in our show's history." Eastwood gave a modest nod. "Happy to be here." "Thanks for having us," De Niro added, adjusting himself in his seat. Behind the camera, Nancy, the producer, let out a small breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. So far, so good. Basic pleasantries had been exchanged without incident. "So let's get right into it," said Joanne, taking the lead. "Clint, you've got this new film coming out next month, The Last Horizon. It's your 3rd directorial project in just 4 years, which is incredible at any age, let alone at my age." Eastwood finished for her with a knowing look that made the audience chuckle. "Well, I don't count the years. I just keep moving. What drew you to this particular story?" Joanne continued. Eastwood leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into that familiar, gravelly register that commanded attention. "It's about a man facing the end of an era. The American West in 1912. Automobiles are replacing horses, cities are growing, and this old rancher has to decide if he's going to adapt or fade away." He paused. "I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling, that the world is changing too fast around them." The hosts nodded appreciatively. In the control room, the director whispered into his headset, "Close up on De Niro, let's see his reaction." The camera caught De Niro listening, his expression neutral but attentive, professional, nothing to suggest animosity. "And Robert," said Diane, another host smoothly transitioning, "your new film Night Streets is getting early Oscar buzz. It marks your return to the crime genre that many fans associate you with." "Was that a conscious choice?" De Niro shifted in his seat. "I go where the good scripts are. This one had something to say about how power corrupts, about the thin line between law and crime." He gestured with his hands as he spoke, becoming more animated. "It's set in today's world, but the themes are timeless. Greed, loyalty, betrayal, the same stuff Shakespeare wrote about." "Both of your films deal with changing times in America," noted Penny. "Is that coincidence? Or is that something you both feel strongly about exploring in your work?" A momentary silence fell. This was the first question that directly invited them to engage with each other. Eastwood broke the silence. "Well, I can't speak for Robert, but America's always changing. Always has been. That's what makes it interesting to examine through film." De Niro nodded. "I agree with that much." The emphasis on that much was subtle but unmistakable, though we might see those changes through different lenses. In the control room, Nancy tensed. There it was, the first hint of the underlying tension. "Different lenses. That's interesting," said Joanne, professional enough to recognize the opening but cautious enough to steer around it. "You both have such distinctive filmmaking styles. Clint, you're known for a very efficient process, often getting scenes in just 1 or 2 takes. Robert, you're famous for your intensive preparation and willingness to transform yourself. Have you ever been curious about each other's methods?" Smart question, Nancy thought. "Keep it about the craft," Eastwood gave a small shrug. I've always believed in not overthinking it. The first instinct is usually the most honest. Get it done, move on. That works for some projects, De Niro replied, his tone measured. For others, you need to go deeper. Really live in the character's skin. Seems like a lot of work, Eastwood said with the hint of a smile. But the results speak for themselves. Robert's one of the best. The compliment seemed genuine, and the audience responded with warm applause. De Niro nodded in acknowledgement. And what about you, Robert? Prompted Diane. What do you admire about Clint's work? De Niro took a moment before answering. His visual sense is remarkable. Nobody frames a shot quite like him. He paused. And he knows how to tell a story without wasting time. I respect that efficiency. It was professional respect, not warmth, but it was something. The hosts visibly relaxed, and the conversation flowed into safer territory. Favorite roles. Funny stories from film sets. Reflections on how Hollywood had changed over their long careers. During a discussion about their early breaks in the industry, Eastwood recalled a bit of advice he'd received from a director on the TV show Rawhide. He told me, "Don't just act tough, be tough." Simple advice, but it stuck with me. I had a different experience, De Niro countered. My mentors always emphasized vulnerability, finding the weakness in even the strongest character. Different approaches to get to the truth, Joanne suggested diplomatically. Maybe, said Eastwood, or maybe it's about what truth you're looking for. There was something in his tone, a subtle challenge that didn't go unnoticed by De Niro, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The audience connects with honesty, De Niro said. Whether it's showing strength or vulnerability, they know when you're putting on an act. Was it just about acting anymore? The comment hung in the air for a beat too long. We're going to take a quick break, Joanne announced, jumping in smoothly. When we come back, more with our legendary guests, Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro. As the show cut to commercial, the tension that had been building seemed to leak out into the studio. Neither actor spoke to the other during the break. Eastwood sat quietly, declining a makeup touch-up with a polite wave. De Niro leaned over to whisper something to his publicist who had approached from offstage. Nancy hurried over to the host's table, bending down to speak quietly. Great job so far. When we come back, let's focus on their philanthropy work. Keep it positive. Joanne nodded but looked concerned. Is it my imagination, or is the temperature dropping by the minute between these two? Just keep it moving, Nancy advised. 2 more segments and we're done. In his earpiece, the floor director counted down. Back in 5, 4, 3. The red light on the camera blinked on, and the host's professional smiles returned instantly. Welcome back to The View, said Penny brightly. We're here with Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro discussing their incredible careers and upcoming films. The conversation resumed, touching on charities they supported and causes they believed in. Things seemed to be back on track until Diane asked what seemed like an innocent question. Both of you have been involved in projects that comment on American society. How do you decide which stories are worth telling? Eastwood answered first. I look for stories about individuals standing up for what they believe in, often against systems that try to control them. American individualism, you might say. De Niro nodded thoughtfully. I'm drawn to stories that show how we're all connected, how society shapes us for better or worse. He paused. And how power, when unchecked, corrupts. Interesting difference in perspective, noted Joanne. It's more than perspective, De Niro continued, his voice gaining intensity. It's about responsibility. The stories we tell shape how people see the world. Eastwood's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you suggesting some stories shouldn't be told? Not at all, De Niro replied. I'm saying storytellers have a responsibility to consider the impact of their work. The conversation was veering dangerously close to politics now. Nancy, watching from the control room, felt her stomach tighten. They were heading into the exact territory she'd hoped to avoid. That's an interesting point, Joanne said quickly. Let's talk about your upcoming... Actually, Eastwood interrupted, something he rarely did. I'd like to address that. I've always believed audiences are smart enough to make up their own minds. They don't need filmmakers telling them what to think. De Niro leaned forward. Nobody's saying they do. But pretending art exists in a vacuum is naive at best, irresponsible at worst. The air in the studio seemed to crackle with tension. The hosts exchanged glances, unsure how to regain control. The audience, sensing the shift, had grown unusually quiet. We're almost out of time for this segment, Diane jumped in. When we come back, Clint and Robert will answer questions from our audience. As they cut to commercial again, it was clear to everyone in the studio that what had started as an awkward but manageable tension was rapidly evolving into something much more volatile, and the show was only halfway done. During the commercial break, the studio buzzed with whispered conversations. Makeup artists hovered nervously near the guests, unsure if they should approach. The floor director was in deep discussion with Nancy, both occasionally glancing toward the two Hollywood legends who sat in stony silence. Eastwood remained in his seat, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. He sipped water and exchanged a few quiet words with a production assistant who had approached with obvious hesitation. At the other end of the table, De Niro was in animated conversation with his publicist Jennifer, who had rushed on stage the moment the camera stopped rolling. "This is exactly what we said we didn't want," she whispered urgently. De Niro shook his head. "I didn't bring it up. But I'm not going to sit here and let comments like that slide." "It's a morning talk show, not a political debate," Jennifer reminded him. "We're here to promote the film, remember?" De Niro nodded, but the set of his jaw told her he wasn't making any promises. In the control room, Nancy was having a similar conversation with the show's director. "We need to redirect after the break," she said, tapping her clipboard anxiously. "The audience questions have all been pre-screened. Nothing controversial." "What if one of them goes off script again?" the director asked. Nancy glanced at the monitor showing the studio floor. Then Joanne cuts them off. "We go to another question." "Keep it moving." The floor director's voice crackled through their headsets. 1 minute to air. On set, the hosts were having their own hurried conference. "I'll take the lead on the audience questions," Joanne said. "If things start heading south again, Penny, you jump in with something light. Ask about their first cars or something." "Got it," Penny nodded. 10 seconds, called the floor director. Everyone settled back into position. Professional smiles clicked into place. The tension in the room was almost a physical presence now, but the show had to go on. "Welcome back to The View," Joanne beamed at the camera. "We're continuing our conversation with film legends Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro. Now we're going to take some questions." From our studio audience, the camera panned to show the eager faces of audience members. Joanne pointed to a middle-aged woman in the front row. "Hi, I'm Patty from New Jersey," the woman said, her voice slightly shaky with excitement. "This question is for both of you. What's one role that the other has played that you wish you could have done yourself?" A perfect softball question. Nancy let out a small sigh of relief. De Niro answered first. "That's easy. Dirty Harry." He nodded toward Eastwood. "Iconic character, perfect execution. I wouldn't have done it the same way, but I've always admired that performance." The audience applauded appreciatively. Eastwood's lips curved in a small smile. "Clint," prompted Joanne. Eastwood thought for a moment. "I'd say Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. Robert brought something to that role that nobody else could have. The intensity, the vulnerability beneath the violence. Masterful work." De Niro nodded in acknowledgement, a genuine moment of mutual respect passing between the two men. The hosts exchanged hopeful glances. Maybe they'd weathered the storm. "Next question," said Joanne, pointing to a young man standing near the back. "Hi, I'm Rick from Brooklyn. Given that you're both known for playing tough guys on screen, I'm curious. Have either of you ever had to be as tough in real life as the characters you've played?" Eastwood chuckled. "Well, I've never had a shootout with bank robbers, if that's what you're asking. But life has its challenges. I grew up during the Depression, worked odd jobs. Those experiences shape you." De Niro nodded. "Growing up in New York, I saw my share of tough situations. But like Clint said, it's different from the movies. Real life is more complicated." "Speaking of complicated," Diane jumped in. "You've both lived through such interesting periods in American history. How do you think the country has changed since you started your careers?" Nancy winced. The question wasn't overtly political, but it opened the door wider than she would have liked. Eastwood shifted in his seat. "America's always changing. Some things for the better, some not. But the core of what makes this country great, freedom, opportunity, that remains. Freedom and opportunity aren't equally available to everyone. Though," De Niro replied, his tone measured but with an unmistakable edge, "and we've seen how fragile democracy can be when people don't protect it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The audience grew quieter, sensing the shift. That's an interesting point, Joanne said quickly. Let's take another question from— No, I'd like to respond to that, Eastwood interrupted, his voice still calm but firmer now. Democracy is protected by following the Constitution and respecting the rule of law, not by forcing everyone to think the same way. De Niro's eyes narrowed. Nobody's talking about forcing anything. But when public figures spread lies or undermine institutions, that does real damage. We've all seen it happen. In the control room, Nancy was practically vibrating with tension. Cut to commercial, she ordered. We can't, the director replied. We just came back. It'll look obvious. On stage, Joanne tried again. Let's focus on your film careers, which is what our audience is really interested in. With all due respect, De Niro said, not taking his eyes off Eastwood. Some things are more important than selling movie tickets. When you have a platform, you have a responsibility. And who decides what that responsibility is? Eastwood countered, his voice still level but with steel underneath. That's what I've always found interesting about certain people in our industry. They talk about diversity, but they don't want diversity of thought. The audience was completely silent now, witnessing something raw and unscripted that rarely happened on daytime television. Diversity of thought is fine, De Niro said, color rising in his face. Spreading dangerous rhetoric isn't. There's a difference. And you get to define what's dangerous? Eastwood asked. Gentlemen, Joanne interjected firmly. This is fascinating, but when someone uses their fame to support policies that hurt vulnerable people— Yes, I'll call that dangerous, De Niro continued, ignoring her. You made a speech to an empty chair. I made films about real people facing real struggles. We have different approaches. The reference to Eastwood's controversial 2012 Republican National Convention speech hit its mark. A muscle twitched in Eastwood's jaw. Those real people you claim to speak for, they don't all think alike, Eastwood replied, his voice lower now. Farmers in Nebraska, factory workers in Michigan, they have their own minds. They don't need Hollywood telling them what to believe. Of course they don't, De Niro shot back. But they deserve the truth, not conspiracy theories and nationalist slogans. The hosts looked at each other in barely concealed panic. This had gone far beyond the typical celebrity interview. The audience was completely still, many leaning forward in their seats, others looking uncomfortable. We're going to take a quick break, Joanne announced, her voice cutting through the tension. Don't go away. As soon as the red light on the camera turned off, the studio erupted into activity. Nancy rushed onto the stage, signaling for the host to join her in a huddle away from the guests. A production assistant approached Eastwood with a bottle of water, while De Niro's publicist once again hurried to his side. This needs to stop now, Nancy told the hosts, her voice low but intense. When we come back, no more open-ended questions. Penny, ask about their upcoming projects. Specific details about filming locations, anything concrete and non-controversial. They're not going to let this drop, Joanne warned, glancing over at the two actors. De Niro was in heated conversation with his publicist while Eastwood sat in stoic silence, his expression unreadable. Then we end the segment early, Nancy decided. We'll fill with the cooking demonstration we had scheduled for tomorrow. On the other side of the stage, Jennifer was practically pleading with De Niro. Robert, please. This isn't helping anyone. The film opens next week. Some things matter more than box office, De Niro replied, though his voice had lost some of its heat. Then talk about those things in an appropriate forum. Not here, not now. De Niro glanced across the stage where Eastwood sat still and watchful. Their eyes met briefly, two titans who had defined American cinema for decades, now separated by a gulf that seemed unbridgeable. In that moment, something passed between them. Not reconciliation, but perhaps a flicker of recognition. They were both fighters in their own ways. Both believed they were standing up for something important. The floor director's voice broke the tension. Back in 30 seconds. Nancy hurried back to the control room, her heart racing. She had produced hundreds of episodes of The View, handled countless difficult guests and sensitive topics, but this was unprecedented. Two of the biggest names in Hollywood were using her show as a battlefield for a culture war that had been brewing for years. Ready in 5, 4, 3. The camera's red light blinked on, and Joanne's professional smile reappeared. Welcome back to The View. We're here with Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro, discussing their legendary careers and upcoming projects. But anyone watching closely could see that something fundamental had changed. The pretense of a friendly morning talk show interview had been stripped away. What remained was raw and unpredictable, like a scene from a film where the script had been abandoned and the actors were speaking their own truth. And as Penny opened her mouth to ask her carefully prepared question about filming locations, De Niro leaned forward in his seat, his eyes still fixed on Eastwood. "Before we move on," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "I'd like to address something that was just said." "Before we move on," De Niro said, his voice quiet but clear, "I'd like to address something that was just said." In the control room, Nancy closed her eyes briefly. "Stay on wide shot," she instructed the director. "Be ready to cut to commercial at my signal." The studio audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. This was no longer the polite, carefully choreographed morning television they had come to see. This was something raw and unpredictable. "You mentioned Hollywood telling people what to think," De Niro continued, looking directly at Eastwood. "But there's a difference between having an opinion and spreading harmful misinformation. When people with platforms, whether they're actors or politicians, twist facts and stir up division for their own benefit, that hurts real people." Eastwood's expression remained calm, but his eyes had hardened. He leaned forward slightly. "And who appointed you the arbiter of what's misinformation?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "That's the problem right there. Some folks in this business think they know better than ordinary Americans. They look down on people who don't share their views." Penny opened her mouth to interject, but De Niro was already responding. "It's not about looking down on anyone," he said, color rising in his face. "It's about caring what happens to this country. When I see policies that hurt working families, that roll back rights people fought and died for, yeah, I'm going to speak up. And you think I don't care?" Eastwood's voice had an edge now, though he hadn't raised it. "I grew up poor during the Depression. Worked every kind of job you can imagine before I got into this business. Don't lecture me about working families." The tension between them was almost visible now, like heat waves rising from desert pavement. The hosts exchanged worried glances, but neither seemed willing to step into the crossfire. "Nobody's questioning your background," De Niro said, his New York accent becoming more pronounced as his intensity increased. "But when you support politicians who give tax breaks to billionaires while cutting social programs, what am I supposed to think?" "You're supposed to think that I believe in self-reliance," Eastwood replied. "That I don't think government handouts are the answer to every problem. That doesn't make me heartless. It makes me realistic about human nature." In the audience, people were either leaning forward, riveted, or shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't what they had expected from a morning talk show, but it was undeniably compelling television. "We really should move on to," Joanne began, but De Niro cut her off. "Self-reliance is fine," he said, his voice rising slightly, "but when the system is rigged to favor the wealthy and powerful, that's not self-reliance, that's just protecting privilege. And when you make speeches supporting politicians who attack the free press, who stir up hatred against immigrants, who undermine our alliances around the world." "That's enough," Eastwood interrupted, his voice still level but with unmistakable authority. "You want to talk about hatred? Look at how people like you talk about anyone who disagrees with you. Deplorable, right? Half the country, written off because they don't share your politics." The hosts were now frantically signaling to Nancy in the control room. This had gone well beyond the boundaries of morning television. "Cut to commercial," Nancy ordered, but the director hesitated. "This is ratings gold," he whispered. "We can bleep anything too specific." "Cut to commercial," Nancy repeated through gritted teeth. But before the director could comply, De Niro leaned forward, his eyes locked on Eastwood. "You made a film about a troubled man who talked to an empty chair, pretending it was the President of the United States," he said, referring to Eastwood's film The Mule, while also invoking his infamous empty chair speech at the 2012 Republican convention. "Maybe that says something about where you're coming from." A murmur ran through the audience. The reference was pointed and personal. For the first time, Eastwood's composure seemed to slip slightly. His jaw tightened. "And you've built a career playing gangsters and violent men," he replied. "Maybe that says something about your values." The air in the studio felt electric. No one was even pretending this was a normal interview anymore. "Let's take a break," Joanne said firmly, trying to regain control. "We'll be right back with more from our guests." "Cut," called the director, and the red light on the camera blinked off. The moment they were off air, the studio erupted. Production assistants rushed onto the set. The hosts huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. Nancy emerged from the control room, her face set in a mask of professional crisis management. De Niro's publicist practically sprinted to his side, while Eastwood sat motionless, his expression unreadable. "This ends now," Nancy announced as she reached the stage. "When we come back, we're switching formats. Penny will do a one-on-one with Mr. Eastwood about his film. Then after another break, Joanne will do a one-on-one with Mr. De Niro." "That's not what we agreed to," Jennifer, De Niro's publicist, protested. "The agreement went out the window about 10 minutes ago," Nancy replied, her voice tight. "We're doing damage control now." Behind them, De Niro had stood up and was gesturing to a production assistant for water. Eastwood remained seated, seemingly unbothered by the chaos around him. "Robert," Jennifer said, turning to her client, "let's take a walk. Clear your head before the next segment." De Niro nodded and followed her toward the backstage area, passing close to where Eastwood sat. As he did, he paused briefly. "Nothing personal," he said, his voice low enough that only Eastwood could hear. Eastwood looked up at him, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Seemed pretty personal to me." "The politics, not the films," De Niro clarified. "I still think you're one of the greatest directors alive." Eastwood gave a small nod. "Likewise on the acting front, but we're never going to see eye to eye on the other stuff." "Probably not," De Niro agreed. It was a small moment of professional acknowledgement amid the tension, but it didn't resolve anything. As De Niro walked away, Eastwood turned to one of the production assistants hovering nearby. "Is there somewhere I can make a phone call?" he asked. The young woman nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I can take you to a private office." Eastwood followed her off the stage, moving in the opposite direction from where De Niro had gone. In their absence, Nancy gathered the hosts for a crisis meeting. "This is an absolute disaster," she said, her voice low and intense. "ABC executives are blowing up my phone. We need to get through the rest of this hour without any more political fireworks." "They're both professionals," Joanne pointed out. "One-on-ones might work as long as we stick to softball questions about their projects." Nancy nodded. "Exactly. No more open-ended questions. Nothing about their opinions on anything more controversial than film lighting techniques. Got it?" The hosts all nodded their agreement. Meanwhile, backstage, De Niro was pacing in his green room, his publicist watching him with concern. "You promised you wouldn't do this," she reminded him. "He started it," De Niro replied, then immediately grimaced at how childish that sounded. I know. I should have let it go." But when he started with that condescending Hollywood elites talk, "Your blood pressure isn't worth it," Jennifer said, "and this isn't helping the film." De Niro sighed and sat down heavily in an armchair. Some things are more important than ticket sales. Across the studio in a small production office, Eastwood was on the phone with someone from the network. "I understand your position," he was saying, his voice calm and reasonable. "But I didn't come here looking for a political debate. No, I'm not refusing to continue. I'm just suggesting we stick to what was agreed upon." He listened for a moment, then nodded. "All right. One-on-one about the film only. I can do that." As he hung up, there was a knock at the door. A young production assistant poked his head in. "5 minutes until we're back, Mr. Eastwood." "Thank you," Eastwood replied. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and headed back toward the studio with the same measured stride he'd shown all morning, giving no outward sign of the tension that had just unfolded. Back on set, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Where before there had been excitement about the rare joint appearance, now there was a sense of barely contained crisis. Crew members moved quickly and spoke in hushed tones. The audience had been instructed during the break to keep their reactions subdued. The set had been physically rearranged. Where the 5 hosts had previously sat at their usual table with both actors as guests, now only Penny remained, with a single chair positioned for Eastwood. The other hosts had been moved off stage. De Niro was nowhere to be seen. 30 seconds, called the floor director. Eastwood took his seat beside Penny, who gave him a slightly nervous smile. "Thank you for being flexible with the format change," she said quietly. Eastwood nodded. "Part of the business." 10 seconds, came the call. Penny took a deep breath and composed her features into a professional smile. The red light blinked on. "Welcome back to The View," she said brightly. "I'm here with legendary director and actor Clint Eastwood to talk about his fascinating new film, The Last Horizon." The segment proceeded smoothly, with Eastwood answering questions about filming locations, casting decisions, and the challenges of directing at his age. No mention was made of the earlier tension or De Niro's absence. As the one-on-one was wrapping up, Eastwood was the model of graciousness, thanking Penny for the conversation and the audience for their attention. "We'll be right back with Robert De Niro after this short break," Penny announced as they cut to commercial. But backstage, another drama was unfolding. De Niro had emerged from his green room just as Eastwood was exiting the stage. For a moment, they stood face to face in the narrow hallway, surrounded by stunned crew members. Neither spoke at first. The tension from their on-air confrontation still hung between them like an invisible barrier. Then Eastwood did something unexpected. He extended his hand. "Good talk," he said simply. De Niro hesitated for just a moment before taking the offered hand. Yeah, something like that. It wasn't exactly reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement of a shared understanding that whatever their political differences, they were both part of the same Hollywood legacy. As their hands separated, Eastwood leaned in slightly. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice low enough that only De Niro could hear. "I thought you were robbed of that Oscar for Cape Fear." De Niro's lips quirked in a hint of a smile. "And I still think Unforgiven is the best Western ever made." With that, Eastwood nodded and continued down the hallway toward his green room, while De Niro headed toward the stage for his segment. Neither man could have anticipated what would happen next. As De Niro settled into his seat for the one-on-one segment with Joanne, he seemed calmer than before. The brief exchange with Eastwood in the hallway had shifted something, however slightly. Not his convictions, those remained unchanged, but perhaps his approach to expressing them. "We're back in 30 seconds, called the floor director. Joanne leaned over to De Niro. "We're keeping this strictly about the film, all right?" De Niro nodded. "That works for me." In the control room, Nancy was on the phone with a network executive, her back turned to the monitors. "Yes, I understand the severity. No, I don't think we need to issue a statement yet. Let's see how this last segment goes." She hung up and turned back to the director. "Let's just get through the next 7 minutes without incident. And we're live in 5, 4, 3. The floor director counted down silently for the last 2 beats, pointing to Joanne as the red light on the camera blinked on. "Welcome back to The View," Joanne said with practiced warmth. "I'm joined now by Academy Award winner Robert De Niro to discuss his powerful new film, Night Streets." The segment began smoothly enough with De Niro discussing his character, a former police detective drawn back into the criminal underworld he once investigated. He was engaged, thoughtful, and completely professional, the consummate actor doing his job. But somewhere in the green room area, a different scene was unfolding. Eastwood had retreated there after his segment, expecting to wait quietly until the show ended. He found himself instead in conversation with a network executive who had rushed to the studio after watching the earlier confrontation live. "Clint, you understand this puts us in a difficult position," the executive, a man named Richard, was saying. "Morning television has certain boundaries. Political debates aren't part of the format." Eastwood sat calmly, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "I didn't come looking for a debate, but I'm not going to sit there and be lectured about my values without responding." Richard sighed. "I understand that. And believe me, we're having the same conversation with Mr. De Niro's team. But the situation has escalated beyond what anyone anticipated. What exactly are you asking me to do?" Eastwood's tone was polite but direct. "The network feels it would be best if we ended today's show with the current segment. No joint appearance at the end as originally planned." Eastwood nodded slowly. "You're concerned about what might happen if De Niro and I are on camera together again?" "Frankly, yes," Richard admitted. A small smile played at the corner of Eastwood's mouth. "Can't say I blame you." Meanwhile, on set, De Niro's segment was progressing without incident. He was describing the physical preparation for his role, the weight training, the tactical firearms instruction, when his publicist Jennifer appeared at the edge of the set, her face tense. She caught De Niro's eye and made a subtle cutting motion with her hand. De Niro faltered mid-sentence just for a moment, before smoothly continuing his answer, but his gaze flickered toward Jennifer again, trying to interpret her signal. In the control room, Nancy noticed the exchange. "What's going on? Why is his publicist on the floor?" "No idea," the director replied. But we've got 2 minutes left in the segment. Nancy watched as a production assistant approached Jennifer and led her away from the camera's sightlines. Something was happening, but they were too close to the end to worry about it now. On stage, Joanne was wrapping up the interview. Your performance in this film is already generating Oscar buzz. How does that feel after such a long and distinguished career? It's always nice to be recognized, De Niro replied. But honestly, at this point, I just want to keep doing work that matters. Stories that say something about the world we live in. Well, we can't wait to see it, Joanne said warmly. Robert De Niro, everyone. Night Streets opens nationwide next Friday. The audience applauded, and De Niro smiled and waved in acknowledgement. We'll be right back with our final thoughts after this break, Joanne added as they cut to commercial. The moment they were off air, Jennifer rushed to De Niro's side. We have a situation, she said quietly. What kind of situation? De Niro asked. Network executives are here. They've been talking to Eastwood in his green room. They want to end the show now. No joint appearance at the end. De Niro's expression darkened. They're pulling him off the show because of me? Not pulling him off, his segment is already done. They just don't want you two on camera together again. Nancy approached them, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. Mr. De Niro, I need to speak with you about the final segment. I already know, De Niro said. They want to keep us separated. Nancy's expression confirmed it. It's a network decision. We'll close the show with the hosts only. De Niro stood up unexpectedly. Where's Eastwood now? In his green room, but De Niro was already moving, heading off the stage with Jennifer and Nancy hurrying after him. Robert, this isn't a good idea, Jennifer warned. I'm not going to be told who I can and can't share a stage with, De Niro replied, his voice tight. Not at this point in my career. He strode down the hallway toward Eastwood's green room, passing startled crew members. When he reached the door, he knocked firmly. The door opened to reveal Richard, the network executive, whose eyes widened in surprise. Behind him sat Eastwood, looking completely unfazed. Mr. De Niro, Richard began awkwardly. We were just discussing... I'd like to speak with Clint, De Niro interrupted. Alone? Richard looked uncertainly between the two actors, then at Nancy, who had caught up to them. She gave a small nod, and Richard stepped out of the room. 5 minutes, Nancy said. Then we need a decision about the final segment. We're back on air in 8 minutes. The door closed, leaving De Niro and Eastwood alone for the first time that day. For a moment, neither spoke. De Niro remained standing while Eastwood sat comfortably in an armchair, looking up at his fellow actor with mild curiosity. They want to keep us apart, De Niro said finally. So I heard, Eastwood replied. Can't say I'm surprised after earlier. De Niro paced a few steps, then stopped. Look, we don't agree on politics. Probably never will. But I don't like the idea of network executives deciding who can appear with whom, based on their political views. Eastwood considered this, then nodded slowly. On that, at least, we agree. So what do you think? Should we go back out there together for the final segment? Show them we can be professionals despite our differences? Eastwood was quiet for a moment. What would be the point? The point? De Niro repeated. Yes, what message are we sending? That people with different political views can tolerate each other for 5 minutes on television? That doesn't seem like much of an achievement. De Niro frowned. Then what do you suggest? Eastwood leaned forward slightly. If we're going to do this, let's make it mean something. Let's acknowledge our differences, but also what we have in common. No talking points, no rehearsed statements. Just two guys who've been in this business a long time talking honestly. Something shifted in De Niro's expression. Surprise, followed by consideration. You think they'll allow that? Probably not, Eastwood said with a slight smile. But if we both insist on it, what choice do they have? We're already on the schedule. Outside in the hallway, Nancy checked her watch anxiously. We need to make a decision now, she told Richard. The final segment starts in 5 minutes. The door to the green room opened and both actors emerged. The small crowd of staff members gathered in the hallway fell silent, watching them warily. We'd like to do the final segment together, De Niro announced. As originally planned, Richard stepped forward. I'm not sure it's not a request, Eastwood said quietly. Nancy looked between them. Can I trust you both to keep it professional? No politics? De Niro and Eastwood exchanged a glance. We'll talk about what matters, De Niro said cryptically. Before Nancy could press for clarification, the floor director appeared at the end of the hallway. 2 minutes to air. We need everyone in position now. The next moments were a blur of activity. The hosts were hastily informed of the change in plans. The set was rearranged again to accommodate both actors. Makeup artists made last-second touches, and then they were live. "Welcome back to The View," Joanne said, a hint of tension visible beneath her smile. "We're joined again by both Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro." The camera pulled back to reveal all 5 hosts seated at their table, with Eastwood and De Niro in guest chairs on either end, physically separated by the hosts between them. "Before we wrap up today's show, our guest wanted to share some final thoughts," Joanne continued, then held her breath, clearly uncertain what would come next. De Niro spoke first. "Earlier things got a little heated between us," he acknowledged, looking directly at Eastwood. "That happens sometimes when people care deeply about issues." Eastwood nodded. "We come from different perspectives, different life experiences. That shapes how we see the world. But there's something we both understand," De Niro continued. "Something that maybe gets lost in all the political noise these days, the power of storytelling. Film at its best doesn't tell people what to think," Eastwood added. "It asks questions. It shows humanity in all its complexity, the good, the bad, the ugly." He smiled slightly at his own reference. "And that's what connects us despite our differences," De Niro said. "We've both spent our lives trying to tell stories that matter." The hosts looked between them, clearly surprised by this unexpected turn toward reconciliation. "Do you think there's a lesson here?" Penny asked carefully. "For a country that seems more divided than ever?" Eastwood considered this. "I think the lesson is that you can respect someone's work, their craft, their dedication, even if you disagree with their politics. And that listening to each other doesn't mean giving up your own beliefs," De Niro added. "It just means remembering that we're all human first." The segment concluded without further incident, with both actors promoting their upcoming films one final time. As the show's theme music played and the credits began to roll, cameras captured De Niro and Eastwood shaking hands, not as political opponents, but as 2 craftsmen who had dedicated their lives to the same art form. Backstage, after the show had ended, Nancy approached them both. "Well, that was unexpected," she said, "but thank you for finding a way to end on a positive note." Eastwood shrugged. Seemed like the professional thing to do. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, De Niro paused beside Eastwood. "Still don't agree with your politics," he said quietly. "Wouldn't expect you to," Eastwood replied. "But I'll be first in line to see your new film." Eastwood smiled slightly. Likewise. It wasn't a resolution to their fundamental disagreements. Those remained as firm as ever. But in an age of increasing polarization, their final exchange offered something almost more valuable. A reminder that respect can exist even across the deepest divides, and that there are some connections that transcend politics. As news of their on-air confrontation and subsequent reconciliation spread across social media, that was the message that resonated most. Not the heat of their political exchange, but the grace with which they had found their way back to common ground. By evening, clips of the show had gone viral, and both Eastwood and De Niro were trending topics online. But contrary to the network's fears, the story wasn't about scandal or controversy. It was about 2 Hollywood legends who had demonstrated that even in the most polarized times, it was still possible to disagree without destroying respect. And in today's world, that was a story worth telling.